going live. All right, here I am. I'm live. Son of a gun. What do you know? Hey, this is Dan Gray. I'm actually broadcasting live from Crestone, Colorado. Actually, the Baca Grande subdivision is actually where I am, and I'm doing my first video since 2014. I used to have a radio station in Gunnison, or I was on a radio station in Gunnison, and I moved to Crestone, and next thing you know, I just stopped doing broadcast, and now they call them podcast, or whatever you want to call them. But at any rate, here I am again. My name is Dan Gray. I'm 70 years old. I'm retired, and I live in the right now. I live in the Baca Grande subdivision, which is outside of Crestone, Colorado. I got this wonderful house. I'm lucky, I live right next to a creek, and maybe we can hear it. But at any rate, the reason I'm here is I want to let you know something about something that happened to me, and what I did and what happened to me, of course. And I just get started here. I first want to start out with my background. I was born in Denver, Colorado. I was an orphan. Thank God for the Catholic Church. They saved my life. That's why I call myself a living abortion. And they adopted me, sold me to two sociopaths. And my childhood was a living hell, but I'm still here. I'm still living. Thank God. If it wasn't for the Catholic Church, I would have been aborted. And so anyway, I grew up in Littleton, Colorado, which is a really cool little subdivision outside of Denver, south of Denver, and it was a beautiful place. It's all, developed and everything now. It's a whole different place now, but anyways, back then it was really beautiful. But so I was born in 1955. And I went to college in Greeley, and then eventually I got a job in 1978 at the Colorado State Senate. I was the Senate reading clerk from 1978 to 1990, and the reading clerk for a legislative body is like the legislative DJ. You read all of the messages from the House, the Supreme Court. You read tributes, memorials. You read, different amendments. You also do the official roll call for the Senate. So you call out their names, and you write that down, and you hand it to the president, and then the president announces what the vote count is. And it was a great job. I sat there in the Colorado State Senate, and I watched hours and hours and hours of testimony, days and days and weeks and months of testimony. So, I learned quite a bit, I guess. And I learned a lot, and I had a great time. I had more fun than 5 or 6 normal people. But I learned about the legislative process, and I learned politics. I learned about political actors. I learned about lobbyists. I spent a lot of time with lawyers, and it was really a good experience. But I mention this because I had a background. It created a background for me in politics and human behavior, and so I worked there, and I was living, like I said, in Littleton. And I wanted to say something right off the bat, because these two stories from Littleton, Crest Butte tie together. But I remember the 60s and the 70s, and the luminaries in the Democrat movement, the liberals. They were telling everybody, after the hippies and the riots and the long hair and everything, that they told people that it's time that you cut your hair, put on a suit and tie, and start taking over local government, local and state government. And this was in the 60s and the early 70s. And that's what a lot of people did. And I think what happened is a lot of liberal Democrats took over a lot of local governments all over the country. And the reason I say that is because for like the last 30 years since I've been here in Crestone, everybody I talk to, I give them my little 15-minute elevator speech about how corrupt everything is in Crestone and Littleton. And I tell you, to a person, they all say, "Hey, that's the way it is. That's the way it was and is in the community I came from." You know, it was dirty. It was corrupt. I keep thinking, well, my 15-minute elevator speech is going to impress people, but it doesn't because they've already experienced that. And when I did work down at the Colorado State House, all from to 1995, I I'd be told by legislators, and I heard this a zillion times from senators and House of Representatives, that they would say, you know, local government is the most corrupt and it's the nastiest. And you can't imagine how much better things are here at the Colorado State House than most local governments. I mean, it's just the worst environment. There's all kinds of, favorship that's given to connected people, and they get appointed to different jobs, and everything's connected. Always there's a way to, self-serving. They give these really good government jobs to their friends and relatives, and they give contracts out to their friends and relatives. And like around here, we have what I actually call an oligarchy, which is the rule of the elite. And it's so heir apparent that there's this like tight knit group of people that control everything, and they work behind the scenes, and they're able to do things that government isn't supposed to be doing it. But they actually kind of have a cultural war going on against Republicans or anybody that wants to go by the rule of law and follow the law. And like, for example, when there's jobs that they do the proper amount of advertising and noticed and hire people that are the best for that position. But what happens most times is a lot of times those jobs go, it's favoritism. It goes out to their family members or friends, or somebody in the cabal. I mean, there's these government jobs are like, especially today in 2025, the government jobs are the best jobs. They're the best paying jobs. They have the best benefits, and of course, all the government people get to retire early. So these governments kind of get into a point where they're an oligarchy. They're run by an oligarchy. They're kind of a little clique. They're their own little club, and you're either in the club or you're not. It's like the term cabal describes that perfectly. So anyway, that's what I found out in Littleton. And what happened to me was, so here I am in Littleton, right? My life is, I worked at Colorado State House. I worked for the Senate. I mean, I had a beautiful house on Windermere in Littleton, and I was about ready to marry this doctor. And I mean, everything was great in my life. Everything was going just fine. And then the next thing I decided that I wanted to encourage my friend John Trujillo, who owned the Mission Trujillo restaurant. He even had a restaurant in Russia. He wanted to run for the Colorado State House as a Democrat. And I said, well, you're not going to get elected as a Democrat, so why don't you change your party to Republican and run as a Republican? And he thought about it and everything, talked to his people, and he finally decided to do that. John Trujillo decided to do that. So, I was doing everything I could to help him. And so the word got out in Arapahoe County in Littleton that I was helping John Trujillo to get elected to the state house as a representative. And he did change his party. And boy, oh boy, that that totally offended the the oligarchy, the cabal, because they already had this guy Phil Pankey picked out to run, and they didn't like John Trujillo. And so anyway, that at the convention, I go to the convention, every year or every 2 years they have a convention, a county convention, and I've been going to it for decades. I spoke at it. I nominated people. I mean, I was the system, and so I go to this convention, and I was told I wasn't allowed to come in, that my pass was somehow, void, and so they wouldn't even let me into the convention. All those years I've been going to that convention, like 20 years, and now all of a sudden, since I was helping John Trujillo, I was no longer allowed to go to the convention. And so that was the first sign that something was going wrong in my life. And then the next thing was I started this newspaper. It was called the Organic Times. I start this newspaper, the Organic Times. Can you read that? Organic Times. Bringing families back to the farm. And here's my name down here. Where is it? Right there. See? I was the publisher. Dan Gray. I don't know if you can read that, but anyway, I was the publisher. And we did this article. It was called Into the Pipe, and my editor, she and this guy Carl Krusky, who was a wastewater engineer specialist, wrote this article here about the end of the pipe. And the reason they wrote this article is because I followed a couple tanker trucks from the Littleton wastewater plant, big 18 wheelers, big tankers. And I'd see these tankers come on to Santa Fe Avenue and drive off, into the rural area. And what is going on there? So I followed the trucks. I go, man, I'm gonna follow these trucks. So I followed the trucks, and I find out where they're going, and they're going out to the farmland out in eastern Arapahoe County, and they're dumping this raw sewage, spraying it out on farmland. And I thought, oh my God, that can't be right. Dumping raw sewage on bare land. I mean, that can't be right. So that's why we did the newspaper article, and come to find out that they were doing it, and it was illegal, and it wasn't the right way to do it. I mean, there is a way to compost wastewater so that all the pathogens are taken out of the wastewater, and you end up, the composting also creates the correct kind of nitrogen that plants want. I mean, there's good nitrogen and bad nitrogen, and bad nitrogen is in wastewater, and bad nitrogen is also in ammunition like gunpowder. And after World War II, they had all this nitrogen, and they started using that on farmland, and that was really a bad thing to do, because it gets into the groundwater and it doesn't help the plants that much. But if you take the compost, or you take the sludge, and you take and you have like mulch, you get mulch, and then you pour the compost, you pour the uh the waste sludge on top of which is sort of like the ground up wooden material, you call it mulch, and you got to do some changing of it to make it, heat up a little bit. I mean, there's a process to it, but it's not that complicated. But you can compost all this mulch with the wastewater poured on it, and you got to turn it over a couple times. Like I mentioned, there might be something you have to add. And this guy, Carl Kuska, he knows exactly how to do it. It's not that hard. So you can compost all your wastewater, and it's a fraction of the cost of building a huge wastewater treatment plant. Like they're talking about doing that in the Baca Grande right now, and the new wastewater plant will cost $13 million. Well, an organic system like this would only cost about $100,000. And it's probably more now, obviously, but at any rate, they didn't want to do that, and other communities do want to do that. Gunnison wanted to do that, but most communities I don't think want to, but they'd rather build these big, expensive plants with all the engineers and the consultants and all the people that it takes to run one of these wastewater plants. And then, it costs millions of dollars. Like water plant here in the Baca Grande, it takes care of about 1,500 households, and it costs $3.5 million a year to operate. So it's a very expensive process. So here I am, I publish this article in my newspaper, and the next thing you know, big trouble. I'm in really big trouble. And so first thing that happened to me was that at the same time, it's probably about 1994, I was trying to get people to slow down. I lived right by high school, Heritage High School. I actually was the first graduating class, or in the first graduating class to graduate from Heritage High School. But at any rate, my house was right there on Windermere, and there was a subdivision to the east of me or south of me, and people were driving so fast. I mean, the kids are walking, they're riding their bikes, people are walking their dogs, their kids. I mean, you name it. A lot of stuff is going on, and they were driving fast, and I wanted to try to do something about it. So I was putting up signs, and I was putting up, slow down, children, that kind of thing. And I was putting up this sign on Windermere on the stop sign, and somebody had been tearing it down, so I put a new one up. And then this guy drives up, and he sees me putting up the sign. Got my duct tape out there and everything. He knows what I'm doing, and he started yelling and screaming at me, and I had no idea. And then the next thing you know, he's driving at me with his car. He was going to try and hit me with his car. And he hit the curb. He went on the sidewalk. I jumped out of the way, and he hit the bush, and he hit the stop sign. And when he went by, I instinctively just kicked his rear panel, behind his back tire. I mean, it was instinctive. It wasn't like I was premeditated or anything. So anyway, the cop shows up, and I get a ticket. And so excuse me. Looks like I got a booger in my nose. Nope. Okay. Anyway, I get a ticket for doing $25 worth of damage to this guy's car. I get a ticket. I get a subpoena to go to court, and they hire this attorney this cutthroat attorney to prosecute me, and and then they made it a trial journey for this $25 worth of damage I did to this guy's car. And so anyway, I get called in, I'm in the court, and they're having a selection of the jury. And one of the people they selected was the neighbor across the street, one of my best friends, Kelly Williams. So, Kelly's there, he sees me, here I am, I'm being tried for this criminal offense of kicking some car that was run me over. But they brought Kelly in just to embarrass me, to make me look bad. And Kelly had to say, "Hey man, I know him, he's my friend, I can't be on the jury." So anyway, they went ahead and they had this court case for $25 damage, and they hired this lawyer. And this guy was trying to trip me up. He was trying to get me to do something that would, disrupting court so that they could put me in jail for, I don't know, rambunctious in court. But this, I swear, to God, this is true. This lawyer would put these real funky teeth in his mouth when he came over to me to question me. So, he looked real goofy. I'm looking at him like, holy mackerel, what's going on here, man? This is insanity. But he was trying to trip me up, or I mean, I couldn't believe something like this could happen in court by a lawyer. An officer of the court has got these fake teeth trying to throw this poor defendant off, but that's what they did, and they were throwing the book at me. And so anyway, that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. But I thought, well, that's probably the end of that. But no, but then things started getting worse, with the John Trujillo thing. And my article comes out into the pipe, and I mean, that just it just made the whole city of Littleton come down upon me. They're on me for my septic system, they're on me for my dog being on the Highline Canal, they're after me for not mowing my lawn. I mean, just anything and everything they could think of, they were after me. And so the next thing I know The next thing I know, it's on a Friday, and 2 Littleton cop cars show up at my house, and they arrest me. And I have no idea why they arrested me, but they arrested me. They took me in the car down to the Littleton Police Department and jail. They made me sit there for 5 hours, and, I wasn't allowed to, you know, to call anybody, although actually I was eventually I got to call my lawyer. And and they charged me. This is the charge, and this is a Friday. They charged me with trying to commandeer a school bus. And so it's a Friday, late in the afternoon. And what I found out later is that Charlie Emily, he was the mayor of the time. He was also supporting the guy that was running against um, John Trujillo. Charlie Emily was insisting that the Littleton police chief cite me for trying to commandeer a school bus, but he wouldn't do it. So he quit. But the Littleton manager would and did cite me for accuse me or cite me for trying to commandeer a school bus. And so I get sent to I get sent to the Arapahoe County Justice Center, and I'm in this it was a brand new building. They had this whole huge entry level. And they take me in there. The Littleton cops take me in there. They turn over the paperwork and everything. And this one Arapahoe County deputy knew from the beginning that it was a trumped up deal. It was a crooked, dirty deal. It was a political deal, and they were just doing this to like ruin my life. And this deputy kept saying really loud in this big open room where everybody can hear it, "This is a bunch of bullshit. This shouldn't be happening," because they were railroading me. And they were gonna what they did was they booked me on, the charges of commandeering a school bus, which is crazy. But that was the only way that they could get me into the position of being put into a 72-hour hold. I mean, obviously, if the guy's trying to commandeer a school bus, he probably should get a checkup from the neck up. So they used all of that as a false pretense to put me into this 72-hour hold. And this guy kept yelling, "Yeah, this is total bullshit. This shouldn't be happening." I mean, it was echoing in this big hall and everything. But lo and behold, yeah, all after all the paperwork was done, they took me out in Aurora to this facility to do, psychiatric evaluations, a 72-hour hold. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And the irony is, uh, they had an ambulance. American Medical Response came to pick me up. And at that time, after I got done being a reading clerk, I was a contract lobbyist. And one of my accounts was American Medical Response. So my lobbying contract came to pick me up and take me for this 72-hour hold so I could kiss that contract goodbye. That was like my number one contract. I was getting paid $1,000 a month to, track and monitor all the stuff that was going on with the ambulance industry and everything. It was a great contract. And see, at that time, I only had to work 120 days a year because they created the 120-day session in Colorado. So that was really good money. Plus, I had like five other contracts. I used to call myself a pimple on the butt of the lobbying corps, but I was a contract lobbyist. I was a professional. I got paid great money, and of course, I'd been working down there so long that I could do the job with my half my brain tied behind my back. And also, since I was so well known, boy, as an example, if anybody mentioned, one of my contracts, like the apartment association or I was also the lobbyist for the Rocky Mountain Organic Producers Association. And like I said, the apartment association and the ambulances. I can't remember. Oh, I was working also with Frida Poundstone. So I work with her on different things. Like mainly I worked on gambling legislation, but I worked on all kinds of stuff. But anyways, but I was so well known that if anybody mentioned one of my clients, God, I'd have like five people me saying, "Hey Dan, somebody mentioned departments or ambulances or organic or something." And I mean, God, my job was so easy. But I did a good job, got paid, blah 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 blah. But anyway, after being after okay, so I get sent to this 72-hour hold. And the first night there, my roommate tried to kill himself. So I stopped that. I wasn't about to let that happen. He was trying to hang himself. So I stopped that. And then the next day, I got to know this woman that was there, and she was gonna kill herself. And so, I ended up talking to her and convincing her not to do it. I mean, she said she was gonna do it, and I ended up giving her my address and my phone number and everything, and she wrote me letters for years after that, thanking me over and over and over again. "Thank you for being there when I needed you." And that's all she needed, I guess, was just a disaffected third party that was interested enough to spend some time with her. And I had a lot of time being on 72-hour hold. So yeah, of course I'm going to try to convince her not to kill herself. But anyway, I mean, believe it or not, that was my introduction to my 72-hour hold, was saving two people's lives. And then I finally got to see the psychiatrist. So I go to meet him, and I told him, I said, "This is all political. You know, I no way I would ever try to commandeer a school bus. And if anyone that would have done that would have been, you'd think they would have stuck them in jail right away, and killed 'em, but, they were just using that as a guise. But at any rate, he goes, "Yeah, that's happened a lot now that, the municipalities and different government agencies are are making false claims against their detractors, like I was. I was telling people that Littleton was dumping their raw sewage on farmland. And so he goes, "Yeah, it's prevalent. It's happened all the time now." And and then he ended up, I told him I was a lobbyist and I worked the state house forever and ever. And oh, he was really interested in that. So I ended up talking to him about politics and personalities because he knew some of the guys. So I would tell him about, tell him stuff about different people he knew. And then he had a couple issues that he asked if I can't remember what it was, but wanted to know my opinion on a few things, and I'd tell him. And I mean, we had the best time. I mean, I love this psychiatrist. He was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed his company, and he was telling me things about his career. And I mean, I had a great time with him. And he goes, "You know what?" I go, "It didn't take me hardly any time at all, but you're out of here. No way you're serving 72 hours in this place. You have no business in here. And I apologize that this happened to you." And he cut me loose. And then I forgot to mention one thing. When I went to the justice facility, for Arapahoe County sheriffs, I was telling you about the big hall and the guy screaming. That it was called the Ed Sullivan Justice Center. Now, Ed Sullivan, or Pat Sullivan, excuse me, he didn't like the fact that I was working with John Trujillo either. And so that's why he, is able to manipulate behind the scenes. And in the justice center there where that deputy was hollering and stuff. So Pat Sullivan, who was, he was the sheriff of Arapahoe County, and he was at the Justice Center. And of course, he had a hand in the way they were able to manipulate the paperwork and get me into a 72-hour hold and in court, and oh my God, everything. But I got to tell you, I keep wanting to say Ed. Pat Sullivan, if you look it up, Pat Sullivan, sheriff of Arapahoe County, he wound up getting, they named the building after him, the Pat Sullivan Justice Center. And eventually that Pat Sullivan had to resign and wound up in jail because he was handing out meth for blowjobs. You can't make this stuff up. You can't make this stuff up. So he got busted. He was given prisoners at Arapahoe County Jail meth for blowjobs. They give him blowjobs in his office. I mean, can you believe that? I mean, it's just unbelievable. But anyway, you can look it up, man. He ended up in jail. But anyway, that's all. That was the whole, you know, I don't know what to call it. Anyways, that's how I wound up a 72-hour hold. And my life was ruined because I lost all of my contracts. And then right during this time, my mom died, my evil stepmother. And I mean, all hell broke loose on the home front. She married this guy that it was the third guy he married out of the family bar. We owned the family bar for years, and that he was the third Howard Weiss. He was the third husband out of the family bar that my mom, my evil stepmom, married. And he was what he was doing was he'd find these, these single women that had property and some money would fall, act like he fell in love with them. And next thing you know, he's, got control of their house. And he had control of my mom's house, which at that time was, worth probably about $300,000. There's a lot of money in those days. A lot of money in these days, not as much. But he did everything and anything to screw me out of any money out of my mom's will that he could. And then my sister, my evil stepsister, Lori Lee, she was in too. And give you an idea what kind of character Lori had. She married her high school sweetheart, TJ. And they got married and they joined the army on the buddy system. And lo and behold, Lori started having an affair with her commanding officer and got pregnant. And she told TJ it was her kid. Well, after my mom died, my sister shows up at my house and she says, "Oh, I got something to tell you." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." She goes, "Lindsay," that was her daughter. "Lindsay isn't TJ's daughter. It's the commanding officer's daughter, Mr. Lee." Can't think of his first name right now. He was a jackass. And I mean, she was like 5, 6 then, maybe older than that. So, I mean, for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I mean, I always thought it was TJ's kid. And I used to babysit her all the time. I mean, we went to the state house all the time, hung out with me. I mean, she kind of grew up down there with me. I mean, we were like best friends. We did videos together. We went to the circus. We went to a lot of the parties that were held around the Capitol. And I mean, I love this little kid. But to find out that I've been living a lie, you know, it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And poor TJ's parents, I mean, the Lindsay Lee was her name, the daughter, the granddaughter, Lindsay Lee. She had her own bedroom at at TJ's parents' home. They loved her. They bought her stuff. They took her places. I mean, I can't imagine how devastated they were. I mean, but that gives you an idea what kind of character Lori had. But anyway, she was doing. Her and Howard Weiss. They forged my signature on documents. I had to go to court to prove that it wasn't my signature. I had to go to court because Howard Weiss was trying to take my house on Windermere. I had to go to court on that. I had to get a lawyer for that. I had to go to court for the crap with, I was explaining with the, with trying to commandeer a bus. Although I didn't ever had to do that. That's right. I didn't have to do that because that was a lie. They couldn't go that far. They just had to use that to get through the county justice center to get me into the 72-hour hold. But then I had a business at the Capitol. It's called Capital Connection. It was my idea, my name, and I had two partners, and we had a online service. Now this would have been in like 94, so it would have been dial up, with our, if you remember that period, dial up. But anyway, we were like one of the first like websites. So you could go to Capital Connection, you could look at download, copy, whatever you did, like the calendar, the house calendar, the journals. You could get the minutes, all that stuff, copies of bills. We had all that stuff online. I mean, we were way ahead of the curve. But anyway, since my life was going to hell, Kenton Kuhn, one of my business partners, we let his computer buddy be uh, one of the partners. So there was three of them. So the two of them decided to vote me out of my company. So I got kicked out of that. So I had to get a lawyer to go fight to get, my third out of that business. So I was involved in that court case. So, basically everything in my life was just it was just a mess. It was an absolute mess. I mean, it was terrible, but, here I am. And so anyway, it was all over this right here, into the pipe, you know? That's what started it. And there's actually it's interesting to note that it wasn't only Littleton, it was, I was trying to remember if you're from this area, maybe you recognize it. It was also Broomfield and Boulder, Longmont, Fort Collins were all doing the same thing, dumping raw sewage on on farmland, open space. And so my newspaper was all over the state. I mean, we were taking this thing all over the state, and so I mean, all those other communities found out about that too. So I was a very unpopular guy. And let's see, what else am I missing here? All right. Well, anyway, so I I just wanted to I just wanted to do this video. I've wanted to do this video for a long, long time so that I can have a recorded message that explains my side of the story. Because when I moved to Crestone, I got elected to the board of trustees, but they had a file on me from Littleton. And of course, Littleton, I don't know what they told him, but well, I almost certain know what they told him. They just basically told him I was, stark raving mad, that I wasn't much of a credit to the community. I needed to be involved in, needed to be institutionalized. So, the people in Crestone had a file on me. They actually contacted, of course, the Littleton officials, and they were more than happy to tell the local officials that they more than happy to tell them that, this guy he's crazy, he's a crazy guy. And so here I am in 2025, and people have been hearing that I'm crazy, and I commandeered a school bus in Little. I mean, I can't get away from this. You know, I've been ostracized by the community in Crestone because they've been told by the mayor, Kizin Lakai, who was also the editor of the Crestone Eagle at the same time, that, she's contacted Littleton and they warned us about him. And, he's crazy, he's violent, you can't trust him. And that's my reputation. And so that's why I'm doing this video, because I want to be able to have my word out there. I mean, my back has been stabbed so many times. I mean, people walk up to me and my back starts hurting. I can tell that they've been saying bad things about me, or they know that, I'm not trusted by the luminaries, the oligarchy around Crestone. So I'm still living this kind of hell. I mean, I've been totally ostracized, and I'm a loner, so I don't really care. But I wanted to get this out there so that other people have had the same experience, know that they're not alone, and that some people see my video and realize that I'm not a bad guy. In fact, when I was on the Crestone board of trustees, I made a proposal to buy water rights, and that proposal got killed. And I wanted to do an organic wastewater system, and that got defeated. But anyway, that's going to be in my next video. I'm going to do a video about my experience of being on the board of trustees in Crestone, Colorado. And then the next move is I got involved after I moved to the Baca. I got involved with the with Baca Grande Water and Sanitation District. And now I'm public enemy number one because I found out all kinds of stuff. But I'm going to do another video about that. I just want to look at my notes real quick and make sure that I told you everything that had to be said, the important things that are kind of factual. And it looks like I got everything done. So I just want to say thank you. My first video since 2014, and I was kind of clumsy there. Had to do the nose thing, I didn't count on that. But at any rate, I'm just a person, I'm doing the best I can. And I hope you learn something about me, maybe learn something about yourself. And I just want to say thank you very much for spending your time to find out about this. And so I want to say, have any kind of day you want. This is Dan Gray from Baca Grande, Colorado. Bye now.